Well, hello everyone. Uh, what would be, you guys look like you're really far away. Um, is it possible for you, each of you, to introduce yourselves, have a bit of an idea about who you are, where you're from, what kind of background you come from? And also, I think later I'd like to know what you'd like to hear from me, because for what I heard was that you want to know a little bit more about me as a woman entrepreneur. So please go ahead.
We can start.
Yeah.
I'm Alex. I'm American. I come from San Francisco, but I've spent the last 4 years in Switzerland. My background is in creative agency world, both large multinationals as well as small independent agencies. And most recently, I've been working at a consulting company focused on e-commerce and digital transformation.
In Switzerland.
Hello, my name is Diana, and maybe I have heavily clicked on your LinkedIn profile the last week, so I'm your stalker. Ignore that, please. But I was really sad that I was really sad that the session last week didn't happen, because I thought, especially you being a female entrepreneur and your story sounds really interesting, I was just looking forward to listen to you and to learn. My career is, I like it to call career because it makes me sound bigger. Started in advertising about 26 years ago. I'm the current Chief Creative Officer of the DDB Group in Germany, running 9 different offices all across the country, and I'm responsible for the creative output. And I'm German by location and by birth. It's not part of my identity. But if you prepared something in German, I'm the only one you can address it to, because it happened over the past couple of weeks that people were throwing some German bits and pieces on the others, and they do not understand. So I'm the only one with a German DNA. But I traveled across the globe. I've used to work in the UK in the beginning, and then ended up in the States for a bit in feature animation. And now being back in advertising, I also moved back to Germany, and I'm from the very northern part of it, so I live in Hamburg right now.
My name is David Slocum. We met very briefly on Friday. I'm a faculty member at the Berlin School, was a longtime academic director, and I will just lend my individual and also institutional apology to you for our not being able to receive you on Friday, and also my great thanks for your making time today. So I won't take up more of our time, because I know that the group very much wants to hear from you, but as I do. But I want to thank you and look forward to this session.
And I think somewhere that might have come across in your interactions with people is that whilst we are enormously attached to who we are and what we come from, not that we know too much about it ourselves, but there just seems to be a kind of a muscle memory about that. At the same time, it's extremely open culture. It welcomes all sorts of influences, but what it does is it sort of it creates its own vocabulary and own language. For example, you would have heard about Jugaad, which is this sort of frugal innovation, where it's a can-do attitude, and which is comes from a certain sense of the positive perspective, the positive psyche the Indian people seem to have inherited from their ancestors. So there seems to be this attitude that no matter what the difficulty, we will always somehow manage to overcome that. So that is always helps. But having said that, I think the economy itself has seen huge shifts. We were a nation which was hugely subjugated by several invasions, from initially from the Islamic world, and then of course the colonization from England, and that decimated our economy to quite an extent. It was really a civilization that was interrupted, And having said that, being the kind of open secular kind of people that we are, we absorb just about everything. The fact that I'm speaking to you in English, it comes from that historical background, So it's all right, we do that, Having said that, we're terribly Indian. I mean, we sometimes force companies who come into India to actually change their offering, change their menus, change the way they service us, because we're just so stubbornly so, So the economy seems to be shifting hugely because, as you well know, are aware right now, we've actually positioned to be a number 3 economy or number 2 economy within not a very long span of time. We seem to have already crossed the, we are actually, it's kind of an ironical statement to make, but we're actually a bigger economy today than what UK has to offer, and that is within 75 years of coming out of colonization. So that's just a bit of an idea about the confidence of this country and where it's going, and which means that it's ripe for innovation. And the number of patents that have been filed recently are, I think, phenomenal. I don't have the exact number, but it seems to be really a rapidly growing scenario for India. The amount of startups that we have are, again, extremely wide range, and in terms of the services they're offering, very insightful and very, very scalable, not just within India, but also abroad. So I think that it comes from a transformation from a post-colonization transformation that India is seeing, greater confidence in who we are, and the fact that the economy is actually going into a sweet spot for us. So I think that is truly a recipe for a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, which is also an innate element of Indians. The number of young people who are already entrepreneurs or aspiring to be entrepreneurs is huge. I think I'm sure they've shared the demographics of this country, that the number of youth, especially Gen Z, seems to be, a huge pool of people, and they bring in with them their own exposure to the world. They are digital first children. They are people who are rooted in India, but they're willing to experiment. They take positions in life. They own philosophies. They fight for it. That's an interesting recipe for great success. Is what I would say is where India is poised at the moment. In softer terms, India has already influenced. When I say softer things like yoga, spirituality, and these have become, very large influences, and they have themselves taken a life of their own. I mean, yoga as we know in India is very different from yoga as we know in the Western world, for example. It's sort of it's been re-looked at and modified and so on. And I think we're going to see much more of that. But I think what is going to happen is, the post-industrialized world reached us late, because of all the colonization and so on. Also, we went into a socialist economy, and it's only rather recently, I think only in the late 90s or mid 90s, that we opened up our economy. So I think a lot of the entrepreneurship has been inwardly focused. A lot of the big businesses and big corporates and industry, which we're seeing. And that's at the current growth is on the back of a lot of that, because we are a big nation. We are big consumers of our own services and of our own goods. But clearly the appetite is for much more. It remains to be seen how this is taken abroad. I feel that much like the trajectory of Japan, I think what went abroad was something which was innovations which were, culture unspecific, innovations which would really be more human centric, more humane centric even, where you people are actually addressing the needs and wants of people around the globe. And those things will obviously be what will leave the shores of India, according to me. In terms of the cultural nuances, I think the cultural nuances for that India own are in some ways already out there, which is a spiritual factor, and so on. But also, I think the ability of the Jugaad mindset, the ability to have that thinking that anything is possible if we put our minds to it, and people, the Indian way of working, of course, we are very, very hardworking people. We are used to working with very little resources. So a lot of the innovations that you will probably see will probably come from a zone of lack rather than plenty. But it's an interesting space because lack and not having enough is great for innovation. But when that mindset is being met with abundance, we'll have to see how some of these ideas can really be scaled up into something amazing. As to what those trends would be, I think the cultural ones are definitely going to be there, but certainly the mass scale ones will be, I think, difficult to tell apart from the innovations from around the world. I think you're going to see both things happening. But what I mean also by the Indian cultural sort of export that probably is going to be seen more is the craftsmanship, the handmade elements of what the master craftsmen who have actually produced, who woven, innovated, carved, and so on. There is a huge movement within the country itself to embrace all that with a lot of pride. There's a lot of funding going in to cultivate that, and I think that is something going to be uniquely Indian, which is definitely going to be seen, in around the world as we move along. Again, drawing a parallel with Japan, so Japan exported their own innovations, which were agnostic of any country, but at the same time, as the culture became more confident, it also exported its cultural nuances, and that got absorbed and integrated into so many different movements. I mean, we see that in architecture, we see that in design, we see that in graphic design, and all sorts of things. So I do believe that would be a fair comparison to make. As I mentioned, that we are both very rooted to our roots, and at the same time, we are completely exposed to what's going on in the world and very accepting of those things as well. So it's the way I have seen things evolve in this country is that it's been a very organic process. No one is overthinking anything. The world is just going ahead and evolving. Having said that, I mean, if you just look at the look at the Bollywood films that we have, they've seen a huge shift. The volume, of course, remains high. We also see OTT platforms see extremely rich, contribution being made on amazing kind of films and programs being put out on OTT. They all have influences from the West for sure, but at the same time, they are so uniquely Indian. The language, the nuances, the rawness, sometimes extremely raw subjects and very, very hard-hitting, violent subjects, which are very unlike Bollywood. Bollywood is all about, living in a dream world where everything, of course, always works out in the end. But you see a lot of cultural storytelling which is coming out, which is way more complex, completely Indian, but you see a lot of influences. And I do think that you're just going to see much more of that. there are going to be these stories which people will be able to relate to around the world. Like you see a lot of cinema, like for example, I mean, what we see in Korea, Korean, programs are hugely popular here. Okay. Again, it's an interesting cultural nuance why Indians actually are drawn towards something from Korea less than they're drawn to from the West. So there is a whole pull towards the East as well. So the influences are there, but we are making our own khichdi. We are making our own hot pot or whatever. So you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of stories which I think people, once they start unpeeling the Indian culture, because it's a very complex culture. It's very, very difficult. Like you said, there's a clash between the West and the East. There is a clash within the country itself. I mean, we are people who there's at least 14 big, important languages. The huge variety of foods, the way we dress, it's all different from the north to the south. So there is a lot, that itself is like a melting pot that's already happening. People are beginning to take a lot more positions about politics, about social changes, etc., which we didn't find before. This is to answer your question about are the youth actually expressing themselves more? They are in very interesting ways. So I would say that watch this space. It's going to be interesting. I would say in India, you will see it coming more from the private sector. For example, the big media houses may want to actually do some of that as people are becoming smarter about how to market and position brand India and these products abroad. So, but it would have to have some help from the government in order for it to see the scale and acceptance. So I would say yes, but it's a little bit further away than what I would like to see. Well, you're right about that. I mean, India's a lot of the economy is largely inward looking. I think a lot of the economy is also especially the international aspect of it, has grown on the sweatshop, background. There is a huge awareness internally amongst organizations about that, and there is a tremendous amount of effort, and this has been there for a while now, to shift the needle towards actually moving away from the sweatshop orientation. I'm talking the tech world, to much more of intellectual innovation and that zone, which I know for a fact is gaining traction. It's a country in transition, and I don't think that you will immediately see under the surface where the wheels are clearly turning. And I think people are extremely aware of that, and extremely aware that they're sitting on an amazing opportunity, especially with what's going on in the world, to become exactly what you're saying, which is a hub of innovation, of not just being the supplier of what is needed around the world, but actually contributor in the largest, in the most meaningful sense of the word. So I would say it's a transition. There's a greater awareness. There's also, as I said, in the sense of abundance, there's much more money available, which means that there's a huge amount of growth within India. But if India is looking for the kind of growth it is, then it can only look to expand in the manner in which you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, I walked into the industry when I was pretty much one of two women who would eventually start on her own. So it was and continues to be a male bastion. So it's it's been a very strange and difficult journey. And also, I come from a graphic design, branding design background. I studied in the National Institute of Design. So for me, I never saw the world of advertising or creativity from the lens that advertising people saw it, which was just as a very focused sort of a narrow definition of creativity and communication. For me, it was always a much wider canvas. So, I was born as a designer into a very, very analog age. And it was also a socialist era where there was really nothing available or no real products or services to sell as they are right now. I thought advertising would give me a certain kind of a background, which it certainly did, and I'm grateful for it. But I always maintained one foot in the design zone. And what I mean by that is that I was always hungry to know more. If there was nobody to teach me, I always made sure somehow I managed to learn that skill myself because I really wanted to. I never just learned only from my desk job. I learned from people. I learned from travel. I learned from books, which are not necessarily just advertising or design books. So to me, whilst that was great, and I was fortunate enough to have amazing mentors, very inspirational people. But I think I always look to life for the bigger inspiration. I was, I think, just a little different in terms of, how should I put it? I just could not think within prescriptive boundaries of the way an industry should be. I just found myself always shifting vantage points and looking at scenarios very differently, and therefore the solutions that I would have would be very different, which is why it was very hard for me to be in a job for a long time, because jobs came, the advertising job just came in with sort of a predefined roles and and expectations, which were pretty much also predefined, And whilst that worked for me for a while, it didn't work for me entirely. So I think I therefore started something on my own. And I think what kept me going was that and in this avatar, we are 25 years old. So to sustain, especially in the kind of world that you bring up a design company for that much time, certainly requires resilience. Certainly requires a lot of belief in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, believe me, there's nobody out there who's going to believe in you. Everybody out there is always going to be there to maybe bring you down a bit, but no one necessarily wanting to push you up. So, and that may come in swings. There are, when 2008 happened, the business completely collapsed. So to actually revive it from nothing required that resilience, required that belief, required a lot of different approaches as to how to innovate. And I re-innovated the organization itself. It moved away from advertising to embracing the world of communication much more holistically. We looked at the world of design much more seriously. We looked at research. We looked at a lot more strategic orientation. We collaborated with people around the world for different, expertise, different focuses, and also bringing in different skill sets within the country itself, which we managed to do quite successfully. So I think that my form of leadership personally is that encouraging people to have a life. Don't just look at your career. Don't just look at the vocabulary that is being offered by your peers, the exposure and experience of peers. Don't just want to gain recognition from your industry alone. That's fine. I mean, that's part of it. But don't let that be the only game on the table. There's a much larger play that's happening in the world. And you need to participate much more in that. You need to learn from it that much more in order to be a creative person. So I encourage my team to do that. I also don't, we spoke about hierarchy. I believe in flat structures, and I've always believed that. I believe in encouraging people to think differently. Also, I had a designer who actually opened the Bangalore office for us. You know, that I felt that she had she could possibly have the spark to do that. Gave her an open field to do it, and she did. She did did it very successfully. So for me, the individual and their talent matters much more than their position and the number of years of experience. So that is my personal way of leading. I also believe that we are partners to our clients. We are not we're not hired guns alone. I mean, we really need to be contributors. We must be seen as contributors, and that's very important. And so we want to work with a lot of pride in what we do, in the ideas we have to offer. And because we tend to work as equals, as partners with our clients, we find that they tend to stick with us longer. They respect us that much more. So that's another aspect of our DNA, which comes from, I guess, a certain personal leadership perspective. Of course, being a woman has not been easy at all, and it continues to. I just see it as an occupational hazard. I don't particularly dwell on it. I'm not driven by angst about it. Okay, it's just the way it is. So I just have to find a way around it in order to do what I want. The work itself is gender unspecific. I mean, it's just about doing good work, being creative, and making sure you take your team along and grow them as much as you are growing up clients' business. Absolutely. I think that, part of the DNA of our company is, because as I mentioned, that for me, it was always a shifting vantage point. And, and I think really what I'm talking about is design thinking, because design thinking now has become such a fashionable thing to own and talk about. And what I didn't realize that I probably intrinsically had that. And so a lot of solutions we offer our clients, not necessarily the brief, addressing just the brief they've come to us with. We far surpass that because of the ability to think beyond the presupposed structure of the industry and also the expectation from the client. So we break that a lot, and I don't think the advertising industry per se is doing enough of that, although it at some level realizes it, but because these have become behemoths which are sort of completely been so rigidly structured, it's very hard to change that DNA in the industry. But I think people who will probably start afresh have an opportunity to think differently. So I don't even call myself an advertising agency because it again narrowcasts me. I see myself as a design and communication consultancy. And that just opens up a new way of thinking. In fact, I have to tell you that we don't hire people from advertising because people from advertising again come with presupposed solutions even before there's a problem, especially here. So again, I don't know about what's happening in your countries, but certainly here. So I found that we became far more creative, productive, ethical even in the kind of offerings that we started to have for our clients. But it's really, creativity abounds, and I think the more we look around for inspiration and the more we institutionalize, I would imagine some of these things would help a lot. I mean, helped me that I actually, for a time, I was living in West Africa. I was teaching children. I was teaching them art and English, and I think that all of that exposure helped me a lot. So I think maybe it was good to have been a bit of a hippie at a certain age in my life to open up different ways of thinking. Most definitely, we're seeing that the hunger amongst the youth is in order to embrace creative world and redefining the creative world and the creative services or the creative arenas in which they want to participate in. So they're not looking at it as a service. They're looking at it as something that they want in their lives. They want to be part of. And as it happens, they also, that partnership needs to be fruitful and it will grow. So clearly, there's a redefinition of that entire zone of creativity. A lot of it is moving into the startup zone for sure. Indeed, it's which is not to say that you don't see creativity being attracted to the industries, to the design industry, to advertising industry. You also see that. They're the happiest though when they are involved in a role which is multifaceted. So the older structures are no longer enough to keep them satisfied or happy.
Thank you, Ms. Vyas. I think all the questions were answered, and it was really, really kind of you to take time out again. From our side, from Bellinger as well as Berlin School, we just want to thank you. And we hope we have a chance to meet up with you once again in Bombay, and I'm sure they will take a lot of learnings back from you. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see how this goes. Thank you so much. Thank you for asking such interesting questions as well. But I really hope that I was able to give you some insightful answers. Okay then. Thank you so much.